morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Leap. It's a lovely Thursday morning here in New York City, but I have the pleasure today of being joined with my friend, Kellie 80. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Kellie 80. I'm the Director of Instructional Strategy for Schoology, and I'm actually coming today from Denver, which is also beautiful this morning.
Excellent. So I got to sleep in a little bit longer than you did.
Yes.
but not too much. Welcome, everyone. You will see, as you log in the GoToWebinar control panel, a place to ask questions and comments to myself and Kellie during this presentation. And I want to test that out. I want to get everyone going here. So why don't you let us know where you are joining us from? Because we usually have people across the globe joining us at this session. In addition, I'd love to know if this is your first time at Leap. Okay, we're going to talk about some really great stuff today, and hopefully get a lot of feedback from you, even more than usual. So let's get to know each other, right? Brian Green, good to have you. You're just down the street from Kellie, right?
Yes, and yeah, I see Kyle Addington from Longmont as well. Hey, Kyle.
Right, always good to have Marianne Powell here, I believe from North Carolina. Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Great to have you all with us as always. Melissa Hughes. Always see your name here this morning. Always love it. Great.
Wow, St. Andrews, first time attending Leap. Yeah, welcome.
Great, welcome. For those of you just joining, third Thursday of every month. That's the easiest way to remember Leap is happening. You should always get the emails, but you know sometimes our emails will go to spam. So third Thursday of every month is the best way to remember this is happening. Great. So we have we are climbing to about 100 attendees to give you a sense. As we go into this webinar, remember that there are a lot of you on here, there are a lot of you asking questions. We'll be responding to your questions the whole time, but you know, we might not see your specific question. We'll often try to summarize the questions we're seeing to make sure everything is relevant. But if you have a really important, relevant idea, it may have just gotten buried in the feed, so feel free to ask it again if we missed it. Okay? You're not being ignored. You're just being buried by your other attendees. Okay, so Kellie, why don't we go ahead and get going here? Let me know, everybody, do you see my screen here with our Schoology Leap logo? Awesome, thank you, Marianne. So to get started, if you are this is not the only place you are required to have this conversation. If you want to take it out into the Twitter sphere, is that a word? I'm going to try to get that word. Okay, Twitter sphere. Use hashtag Schoology Leap so you can connect with other people joining us today. We're going to be talking about some pretty interesting things, Kellie, and they're probably topics that a lot of you have either heard at conferences and various professional development opportunities, and many of you have probably presented on these ideas yourself. What we're going to be talking about is SAMR, TPACK, and other frameworks that many institutions use to help guide their integration of technology into teaching and learning. So let me just get things going here by firing off a poll so we can get a sense of if you are already using these frameworks, if these frameworks are new to you, if this is new information. And I'm going to share these results as they come in. And already about half of you have voted here. While we're doing this, if anyone does have audio issues, I find the best and fastest way to correct those issues, they usually have to do with your incoming internet network. think the easiest thing to do is disconnect your audio. There's a little like mute button or an option to switch from either VoIP or your phone line, and then reconnect it. If that doesn't help, try calling in on the phone line, and that one is usually always clear. Okay, so let me share this poll with you. There we go. A great number of you are using SAMR. A few of you are using TPACK. 4C is gaining popularity here. And also good to see that these are new concepts for some of you, for about, looks like a fifth of you. Okay. So what we'll do is, as we go through this, we will both define what these are, look at how they might appear in Schoology, and think about if they are always the best fit for every scenario and how you might be using some of these in concert together. Now, I would love to see in chat here, you know, I know in this thing, I usually just talk a lot because it's my webinar, right? But I love not talking. I love hearing from you, right? I love listening to what you all are doing. I'd love to know if we have anyone on the line who has actually presented on these topics, either at their own organization or in a conference setting, because I'm going to rely on you to raise your hand. There's a little hand-raising feature in GoToWebinar, respond in chat, and open this up, because there's never just one way to do something, okay? Many of you may have seen a presentation we did at the beginning of this year, right before the school year started for many of you, talking about going to the next level with Schoology. And we based that around the SAMR model for integrating technology. There's actually a recording of that out on YouTube. I'll pop that in chat here for you. Hold on, let me do that again. You should all see that now. Feel free to check that out if you want to dive deeper into some of these concepts. That it's a bit more technical, that session. And Kelly, walk me through SAMR. I believe the idea is we start with substitution. We see a map here that takes us along the mountain cliff range. Maybe this is just, you know, dedicated to you being in Colorado, but often you see a ladder or a pool model being used. How do we start off?
Well, substitution, I think a lot of people have familiarity with SAMR, but it's really just, you know, taking something that you may have done in a paper pen environment and layering technology on it where there really isn't much of a functional change. And so that's sort of, and when it's depicted on the ladder, it's kind of at the bottom level of that ladder. And something that you and I had talked about was, you know, sometimes a substitution is really fine. If what you're doing for learning is really effective, that doesn't mean that you're at the bottom of the ladder. So I sort of like that you kind of used mountains here, plus it's, you know, we're in Colorado, I am. So.
Right, and so that idea of just replacing one thing with something else, something that was in paper, now it might be in a digital format. It's all, of course, just a starting point to get you to this next section here, augmentation. How would you see augmentation as being different than substitution?
I think that with, I think the key there is that word augment, where, you know, it's really not that functionally different, but it adds maybe a new component that wasn't there before that allows you to add something, you know, not something gigantically huge, but it just shifts something just slightly enough so that it's a little bit different. You can do something a little bit more than you could for just the pure substitution model.
Absolutely. So let's stop there before we get too far ahead of ourselves. Often people think of substitution augmentation being the first steps at bringing in technology. According to that SAMR framework, I always like not talking in just theoretical and esoterics, but really seeing some examples. So what we've done here is taken these frameworks and just looked at one tiny thing in Schoology and see how it might evolve along these frameworks. So let's take a discussion. A discussion being one of the most versatile materials you can use in Schoology, in my opinion. If you are simply using a discussion at that substitution level, you might just be doing something like this. If you have a prompt you're asking in class, you might put that in Schoology, right? So everything is digital, nothing fancy. You're just moving one thing to the next. Where augmentation is a bit different. We are enhancing what is happening because of technology. So, for instance, in the previous discussion, we're simply asking students to share some information about inventions that have impacted their worlds. But here, because we're using technology, students can immediately share a link to a resource, a video, an article, maybe just even an image that really illustrates their point more. Immediately, what the students can do is a bit augmented because of the technology existing. Now, is learning being impacted? Maybe, maybe not. It's certainly starting, though, to provide some different routes in, okay? And we'll continue to dive into that. So substitution and augmentation start off with, and then we elevate a little bit more to M for modification. What's different when I want to say that we're crossing a threshold here. What's different there? And for those of you online, if you have your own, want to put this in your own words, I see Kyle, Jim, Brian have some ideas here. Share those as well. I'm watching chat as over on my other screen here if you're wondering what I'm looking at. Great. Now, a couple of, just a technical question here. A couple of people have asked about the chat in GoToWebinar. Your questions go right to Kelly and I in GoToWebinar. The chats come to us, and we respond back to you. You can't actually see each other's chats in GoToWebinar. It's a technical question there. So if we start, let's say we have a discussion here. We're starting with the substitution, just putting that discussion online. We're going to the augmentation level by using those digital resources. Suddenly those resources become available to you and available to students and learners to share because you've made that transition online. Really where we want to get is to a modification level, which is a bit different. Kelly, how would you describe modification, or how have you seen modification been used?
Well, actually, I'm gonna pick on Kyle because Kyle just posted in the chat that modification allows for a greater degree of flexibility in how and what students do. And then let's see, Jim mentioned about augmenting extends more resources, options, and places to find something. And then Sean mentioned that modification means making actual changes. And I think that's again, if we go back to the root of the word of modification, it's actually forcing you to rethink the way that you've done something before. So you're going to actually modify what you may have done to account for what technology can now allow for. So I think it's a deeper layer there.
And I think that at modification, what I like about it is you're starting to, there's some reflection happening here, both for the instructor, teacher, faculty member, and for the students. And if you do learn in a different way, suddenly ways to express or to demonstrate your knowledge and skills might becoming available to you at this point.
That's something Jim mentioned was modification often involves something that's more active on the student side. Maybe the students are creating something, or I don't want to imply that augmentation or substitution is a passive learning model, because it really depends on what you're doing. But I do think that you can leverage technology in a new way when you get to that modification level.
Absolutely. And as we move to redefinition, I want to actually circle back to what you just said, because I think it's really important to give a megaphone to this a little bit. Just because you're at these levels here does not mean that somehow you are doing less than you should be doing, or that your teaching and the students' learning may not be effective. This might be exactly what is needed, right? And before we talk about different ways to view this, and possibly some of the limitations here as well, let's wrap up with defining redefinition. And again, I'm going to look in chat to see if everyone has some ideas here as well.
Oh, and we have a good question too from
I'll say to Danette, I'll say to Danette real quick that we are going to continue to break this down and go back into Schoology and look at how a discussion will further evolve into these frameworks.
But I will say that Matt just gave us a really good example of redefinition, I think, that might help Danette. Matt mentioned that working to connect with the classroom in Finland, somewhere that's very remote, so that people can interact. That's not possible without technology, and I think that's the defining. If you look at what Dr. Pointadora says about that redefinition area, it's really doing something that it was inconceivable before, wasn't possible in any way, shape, or form without the technology involved.
Exactly. I like the phrase that he sometimes uses, previously unimaginable. Like,
yes.
This is not something that was on your roadmap that you were saying, in 2 years we will be able to do X. It's that when you get to that place in 2 years, suddenly there'll be ideas that were previously not even conceivable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is really just the beginning of what we're talking about here. Let's continue through this. The idea of substitution, augmentation, modification, redefinition, break these down more and go back into Schoology and look at some real examples. As you build things in Schoology, what we're going to see is that substitution and augmentation are rather instructor-centered in my mind. So that when we look in Schoology at our examples, they're things that the course creator, the teacher, faculty member made that were really for student consumption and response. They're still rather instructor-centered. As we move on to modification, we intrinsically become more student-centered as well, as the modified instruction allows for more individualization, more differentiation. Okay, so here again on that topic of just a discussion board, just on the idea and topic of inventions, we are asking students to reply in more depth. Okay, tell us more about what they're doing, describe what they're doing, and here we may be encouraging students. I'm going to go to a student view here, Pam. We may be encouraging students to respond differently as well. Oh, hold on, my folders are not published. Awesome. Using other options. So often when we first think of any instruction, just without thinking, we assume text-based responses. But here we may encourage students to actually share things they've created, right? We may give them the option to record themselves using audio-video to explain themselves. If they're not a strong writer but are a great speaker, great at explaining themselves, great at telling a story, why not make that option available to them, because the technology has opened up that possibility for modified responses? And that gets pretty interesting, not only from the student perspective, but also from the teacher perspective, actually having that be possible in the way that this prompt is designed. If we move over to redefinition, this gets even more interesting, and this goes right back to that example we saw earlier. The idea of doing things that were previously unimaginable. Let's say you're talking about inventions. You're asking students what really matters to them. Well, a student in, let's say, Minnesota, her priorities, things that are actually impacting her life, are going to be really different than someone, let's say, in Hong Kong, than someone in Kenya, and somewhere else. Well, here we could actually share this discussion out to another class, make global connections to understand that inventions have cultural relevance, right? This is a completely redefining the way we're approaching this, that we're not just talking about, let's say, a STEM class just about engineering and design. We're talking about cultural relevance, and suddenly this becomes a really interdisciplinary lesson immediately, just because we're able to start redefining how we even think about approaching this subject. And I think that allows students to also redefine their own experiences and to own them a bit more, and that the learning is not just within their classroom. It's not what just their teacher says. There are experiences everywhere that are going to be valid and different than their own. So those are just a few different examples of those changes. If you want to dive more into this, check out that YouTube session that we shared in chat earlier, and that just only goes into SAMR and talking about looking at different ways to go along that path.
We've got a question, Bradley, from Pamela about how do you create a shared international discussion, like the example you just showed?
Great question. There are a lot of different ways to do that. Some people actually create a course outside of their SIS integration that is freestanding, and then they use the access code in the course to share out to another teacher. There are a lot of Twitter chats and things like that that help teachers connect to teachers in other areas and other global connections. There are also some Schoology groups. There's a Global Educators Schoology group if you search the Schoology groups. I believe it's called Global Connections. A lot of people don't know that this little search box will allow you to also search outside of your school for publicly created groups. And then, so you could have everyone in one course like that, which is pretty straightforward and allows you to build on the discussion. Another interesting idea is, this is a really cool advanced topic. It only works in courses that are not linked. If you're using section linking, this may not be an option for you. But if you just have a freestanding course, when you first add a discussion, there's a really neat feature that allows you to share a discussion, and that gives you a special passcode to use in Schoology to share with others. Kelly, I will pop out to the support center and grab a link for shared discussions.
Okay.
I will caution you that this is a really advanced, cool feature, so you're probably going to want to do this with another teacher who's also really familiar with Schoology. It's nice for sharing an isolated single discussion with another teacher in another classroom. The easier option, I think, is to create a single course that could be an ongoing global collaboration. What are your, that's my gut feeling about sharing outside of your district. What are your thoughts on that, Kelly? And has anyone on the line been doing that? And do you have opinions on what has worked and what hasn't worked?
We have like just a technical point that Ken Zimmerman made that, sometimes grading, if you're using a shared discussion board, that messes with the grading options because the grade book that's tied to that assignment is no longer now in one single course. It's now living in two different places. And so the grading doesn't work the same way as it would with the normal discussion that's contained within your course. And that's when Bradley mentioned, sometimes it might be worth, if you have like an ongoing collaboration with another school, simply creating another mechanism for having those shared discussions. So maybe it's building a course or a group outside of your SIS and using those join codes to let people all be in the same group together versus a shared discussion board. I think the other option for grading would be you'd have to come up with a different way to just assess that. Maybe it's creating a new grading column in the Schoology gradebook to assess that one activity that didn't natively live there.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a couple of options there. I think they're both good. I put this in chat, Kelly, but I like to point it out. If you're using a shared discussion or doing something else that can't be graded in Schoology, maybe grading is disabled for this reason or that, like a discussion, I always like to point out a somewhat little used but powerful feature in the gradebook, the ability to just add a freestanding grade column, because you can always just add a freestanding grade column unattached to Schoology materials to enter grades for maybe a shared discussion that is not supporting those scores. I love that ability just to pop in grades for anything without having to worry about the actual material being used.
Right. Kyle mentioned that they are not sharing necessarily outside the district, but he said he's working on a project where discussions are happening between two different schools. But he said that it's been cool, and I'd love to know, Kyle, what kinds of things have been kind of transformative about that. But it said it'd be super helpful to be able to put group discussions into folders. And that's probably a good point to bring up since we mentioned groups. The group discussion area works a little bit differently in groups than it does in courses. It kind of lives in a separate spot. So if you are pursuing a group, just keep in mind that the discussion lives in the side navigation versus living inside of folders like it would within a course.
Yeah, and I find one limitation with the group discussions. I really like using group discussions for ongoing forums within a group that might span over a long period of time where updates are really just immediate information. One limitation I find in a group discussion, which is why I favor course discussions, is the lack of due dates. I just so rely on the calendar for everything in my life that can feel limiting sometimes. But it really depends on what you're using it for.
Somebody asked a question about whether or not that freestanding grade column would sync to your SIS. It functions like anything else that would be in the Schoology gradebook. Once you have that column in there, it just pushes over.
Yeah, as long as it's in a category. Whatever rules, depending on the SIS grade passback sync you have, we don't have them for all SIS. But if we have it for you, just remember it has to be in a category the same way an assignment would, and then it syncs back. That's actually the number one way. If you're trying to grade non-digital work in Schoology, like class presentations, things like that, grade columns are a great way to go. Great, so I will be sharing this slide deck, which has some extra information for you in the Enterprise Leadership group, so that you can download it, you can use it yourself, you can modify it, make your own copies. It has some extra milestones, some examples of what you might see, everything we've covered so far, so you can take it away with you. But let's jump to talking about the TPACK framework. It's a really different way of looking at how technology is being integrated. And Kelly, when we were talking, in planning this, I really like this discussion we got into, how SAMR does feel like a linear model, like you have to do one thing before the next, and then the next. which is not really true at all, because you could, tomorrow you could, without knowing too many technical details, you could get into doing shared discussions and things like that. But it feels somewhat hopelessly linear, even though it's so useful. And TPACK is probably the opposite of that. It's you often see it in a Venn diagram format. Here we've put it in more of a target format. And I like this. Maybe it suffers from the opposite problem of it can be hard to know where to start. But could you give us an overview of TPACK? And I'd like to see in chat if anyone has just reflections on that, the difference between SAMR and TPACK, as Kellie walks us through the idea of TPACK.
Yeah, it's interesting. We saw in the poll that we had a much more, I would say, a greater number of people that were comfortable with SAMR, and maybe fewer that had experience or were using TPACK actively. Typically, you see TPACK represented, kind of the official graphic is 3 circles that all intersect in the middle, like Bradley mentioned, the Venn diagram. And one of the things that I think is really important about looking at the TPACK model versus SAMR is that SAMR is very, very useful, but something that I think sometimes gets ignored is this idea that technology has to be layered in and layered over content knowledge and pedagogy. And so what's strong about the TPACK model, in my opinion, is that it kind of forces you in your planning, when you're thinking about an activity, to make sure that all 3 of those dimensions are represented and given some attention and some I guess, deliberate thought around, instead of just, well, this looks like a cool tool. Kids can do all kinds of good stuff with this. It kind of forces you to call out what standards are you trying to address, and then knowing those standards and knowing that content, what's the best instructional strategy that we have to help kids actually learn that and show what they know? And what is the best technology tool then that would layer on top of that? The thing that Bradley and I actually mentioned was that the official TPACK model has technology as the top circle. My theory is it's because it was the way to make a good acronym, to start with the T for TPACK. I don't know if that was the real reason. But I've seen a lot of people who've actually written blog posts on not liking that the technology is at the top because that gives it maybe a weight that it shouldn't have. So you'll notice that in the Bradley's redesigned TPACK graphic, we have technology there, but it's at the bottom because it undergirds really what's happening with content, with pedagogy.
Yeah, absolutely. And while you were giving that overview, totally agree with it. I just shared 2 links in the chat window so everyone sees them. Just the documentation on the shared discussions we were talking about, and a group access code to a global classroom connections group that came out of Schoology Next last summer. And those can be some pretty cool resources to try to find other classrooms to partner with. But let's go back to here. So one of the reasons, as you're saying, that I liked flipping, well, when we were first talking about this, you're always talking about hitting the target. So one reason why I like this target diagram a little bit more than a Venn diagram. And again, the idea for flipping and putting technology at the bottom is the hope is that everyone already has great pedagogy. You probably have great content or are in a constant search for improving that content. And often technology is the new piece there. Okay? So because people are less familiar with this, I like breaking down the 3 areas and then looking at how the overlaps are. And we're going to look again at a Schoology discussion, how it might be realized in those different areas. Now this is what I've seen a few too many times. I'm going to take this through the lens of actually delivering PD and actually implementing these ideas. Okay, you're working on bringing technology into the organization. Great. An hour of PD just on a discussion board. Covered all the buttons and all the features. That should, good to go. Goodbye. I've seen it happen. Obviously not the way to go because if there's no pedagogical relevance, no one's really going to be implementing this technology or you're introducing. And if you aren't framing it within the context of the content people are teaching, also not going to have a lot of relevance. And definitely not going to impact outcomes. The same concept, if any of these things are in isolation. Great, you have a business course, you hired an MBA to teach it. No, that was easy, the easy button. Unfortunately, they have no teaching experience, no pedagogical ideas, and they probably don't know how to use any of the school's technology, things like that. So, and this, we know this happens as much as we try to prevent it. You have a star teacher, best teacher, and you know what? She's going to teach a whole new course starting in a week, and she just found out that she's switching grades. Well, if she doesn't know the content, she's not going to be a great teacher, and certainly also introducing technology at the same time, not going to happen. I taught this one summer PD once, and someone had such a go-getter, great teacher, but she had just found out she was going to be teaching the new grade level about, I think, 2 to 3 weeks beforehand, and they had just implemented Schoology, and they had just got new ebooks all at once, and it was like deer in headlights. So she was a go-getter. She made it happen, but anyway, any of these things in isolation are tricky, which I think is why those overlaps are so important. So when we combine technology and content, what is this helping us with? What questions is it answering? Well, I like this idea that you're really understanding the learning objectives, you're understanding the curriculum, and you're thinking about where the technology is going to actually fit in the content. Where can the technology be most effective? That feels strategic to me. Of course, as an instructional designer, that's kind of the world that I live in, is how to make those connections. Pedagogy may not be in here. There may not be that practical classroom material, Kelly, but the planning is probably appropriate. Mm-hmm. You want to pop into Schoology and see what this looks like a little bit? Let's do it. So, technology and content. Again, going on the theme of inventions. Here we have a discussion, and we're absolutely bringing content and technology together. We're wanting to engage our learners with a concept of self-driving cars, to start talking about how things impact us. And we have a handle on technology, so we understand how to use discussion boards, we understand how to embed content, and we've also vetted some great material to go with it. We've embedded this excellent YouTube video explaining the self-driving car ethical dilemma, if you will. And we want to use this to engage our students. Now, Kelly, when you put this together, I want to actually see in chat, this looks good. Looks like a cool way to start. It certainly doesn't look like a beginner level discussion board, but what's missing here? And I'm asking everyone in chat this. What feels missing here? See some ideas. Okay, so here is an idea of something beyond text. Kyle has a great idea of student creation, right? This is very just the prompt. It's just the content. Where is the student voice? Where are we telling them? Where is our prompt to get great responses from them? And where is our feedback mechanism? And Catherine gets to this. There are no replies, there's no explanation. Where is the actual meat of the learning? A great idea to get student opinions before they watch the video, right? And all of these ideas all of the concepts that I'm seeing here, Kelly, all of these I think point to pedagogy. I feel like all the great teachers right now are weighing in and leap and saying, wait, where's the teaching happening?
Right.
So let's look at this another way and flip this on its head. Let's say we have technology and pedagogy. We might be missing the content piece. Now this is a bit more interesting in terms of student responses. We see that we've provided a rubric. Students absolutely are seeing that academic standard that they're being measured on. They're given expectations. Okay. They're being asked to explain it. We may be encouraging students to use some of the other technologies available to allow them to give feedback in different ways. And it's being scored. I think that's a pretty decent coupling of technology and the pedagogical side. But how are we doing on the content piece? You'll see up here. And I'm scanning over your comments right here. So Aaron gives the idea of, well, why aren't we giving a couple of different resources, a couple of different ways to understand this? We just gave them page 117 of the textbook about Thomas Edison, the invention of light bulbs, right? I love textbooks. I have nothing against textbooks, but there is something a little bit limiting when we have so much else available to us. Okay. And for me, what is limiting there, Kelly, is actually not the textbook itself. It's just that our textbook was written about Thomas Edison, and it was published maybe 10 years ago, where there were no self-driving cars. We didn't have all the crazy technology and crazy inventions happening right now. So there's something immediately limiting about not utilizing all of that current, totally up-to-date content that is available on the web. So if we put all these together and try to hit that target, here we have a video, and to a couple of people's points, we're embedding some other things like an answer garden to immediately get feedback and to visualize that feedback to students at a gut level, and then we're asking them to dive deeper. And as we were talking about this, Kelly, I think that what we didn't originally plan to do everything on discussions, but as we played around with this, the more and more it seemed like, wow, it really, with just a simple material like a discussion board, you can really keep diving deeper on all of this without really learning too many buttons, too many features. It's really what you bring to Schoology to hit that target or to go along the SAMR model.
And I think it's a really good entry point for a lot of teachers as well. We saw a lot of people that when they first started using Schoology, the discussion board felt kind of comfortable. And so this would be a great way, I think, to get a teacher to think about going deeper and maybe starting small and going deep versus going broad and not going very deep.
Absolutely.
Somebody asked about an answer guard. I think Aaron's asked about answer guarded.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is. If you're not familiar with it, this is really cool. It's a cool website that lets you basically embed responses and visualize them right within Schoology or any website. Kelly, if you have the website there, you can share it.
Yep.
Share it.
Really. Yep.
When I first found Answer Garden, man, what a fun tool.
Plus embed code. My other favorite thing, embed code.
Absolutely. One thing that I really like about the Answer Garden as well is that all the responses are anonymous. So students, where in the discussion board, they'll eventually see each other's names. And in Answer Garden, just to get really base feedback, you get that anonymous, really usually clear and transparent feedback.
And speaking of other tools, while we're looking at the that next example or that next slide, Kathy Gilner did bring up that depending on what you're integrating, you could also use other sources like BrainPop.
Yep.
Um,
Great idea.
Bringing other things into a discussion that might really give some richness to both the content and the way kids can interact.
Absolutely. So on that level, when we talk about going deeper versus gaining a lot of exposure, this is the way I always suggest implementing Schoology, or pretty much any technology, is that you could take the approach of teaching everything: assignments, discussions, test quizzes, groups, resources, the whole bit, which may be good for the people providing support to teachers so that they can answer questions, but not great for teachers and faculty themselves, because their responsibility again is student learning, not to learn all of Schoology, right? Which is why maybe picking a discussion board and just figuring out how to go deeper through TPACK and SAMR or the 4Cs, getting deeper through the features can be more comfortable. It helps faculty gain confidence in the tool set. It helps them learn things like embed codes, but just within one nice framework of a discussion to get deeper. And even though you're only using that discussion, it doesn't mean that you can't also leverage BrainPop and Answer Garden and Google Slides and things like that may already be in someone's skill set in their tool bag. Using one item might allow you to better get everyone to start leveraging those other resources together inside of Schoology as a connector between those resources. So how do we go deeper? This is sort of our point we wanted to get to. A lot of us in the technology world speak about SAMR, TPACK, 4Cs because our responsibility at our organization is the implementation of technology. That's what we do. But another way to think about this is to, I'd say, roll back a few decades and think about how all of these methods actually impact learning and impact the cognitive processes that students and learners are going through, what they're being called upon to do. Because you could be using all the buttons, all the bells and whistles, all the answer gardens, all the Kahoots, everything, and not impacting anything at all. But boy, does your Schoology look good. It doesn't mean anything unless students are actually really being called upon to do higher order. Now, hopefully, Kelly, I think that hitting the TPACK target, getting to the redefinition level of SAMR, gets us here, but this should probably always be our target. I think there's some intrinsic challenges with this. I'm going to share some resources out that I know we have a lot of sysadmins on the line. Let's do a quick impromptu anonymous feedback. Again, we're the only ones who see this, but I'd love to see in chat if you are a sysadmin or if you're more on the tech side, and the idea of Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive process models, if this is totally out of your realm and the realm of probably some other people at your organization. Let's get a sense. I'll tell you, I started off on the, even though I have the education background, professionally I started off more, I'd say more on the IT part, and learning some of this was new to me, but really changed the way I look at everything. So here's a great resource that I think is just excellent for people trying to get more familiar with the idea of teaching and learning and how some of these other taxonomies, frameworks might help you. Okay? And that's just my absolute favorite resource from Iowa State. I'd actually suggest clicking through that entire website because it has these just great interactive maps to understand these different levels. For those of you new to this, the idea of Bloom's taxonomy, it's almost similar to to SAMR and TPACK, but you're starting off with lower level things, remembering facts, understanding them, constructing meaning and messages through those, actually applying something procedural that you've learned to something else, right? And if we skip to the end, you're actually creating work. Now in Schoology, we've been offering some ideas of how you'd be using discussions in TPACK and SAMR. But if we're talking about just a discussion, here's basically our wrap-up quiz for everybody. If we're talking about just SAMR, just no wrong answers here, what would be some different examples of using a discussion to elicit these different levels of the cognitive process according to Bloom's taxonomy? So I'd like you in chat just type one of the levels and then something that you would like to see teachers doing in Schoology to elicit that kind of thought from students. I'll bring up another graphic here that I think is an easier way to see it as well. I'm just going to let you all type and think a bit about this. We're going to just look at that chat as your answers come in. As answers come in, Kelly, I have to say that this is has so far been one of my favorite nerdy EQ loops we've done, looking at both theory and seeing practically how we might be implementing things in Schoology.
Yeah. I think that's one of the strengths that we have with something like Schoology is the way that it can really scale to do so much in terms of student learning. And I like the discussion just because I think it's important to think about what are we really trying to achieve. And I think sometimes the why gets lost in, like you said, the training of like, well, here's all the buttons for a discussion board. But really, what is it that really lends that richness to what we want kids to be able to do? So yeah, this has been a fun one for me too.
Okay, so we have some great responses here. A lot of people talking about the idea of, especially at the highest level, students creating things in Schoology and using, not just text-based items, actually using some more rich content. And sometimes we were just talking about these websites. Don't forget about all the apps on iPads and Android devices that allow students to create their own content, things like Notability and Educreations and things like that, that can then be shared back into Schoology.
Yeah, we have a lot of good ideas in here. So, Joseph just mentioned, offering two opposing articles, having students left aside and then having to justify their response and then commenting on each other's. That idea of also similarities and differences we know from research is a really powerful way for kids to understand a concept. So the more we can embed things like that, that gets to that pedagogy side of the TPACK model. Absolutely.
And I would say that when you get into those areas of analyzing, I saw a great post. I think this was on Alan November's website. I think he goes on the Twitter handle Global Learner. He had a great article that suggested the idea of teachers sharing a fake news article and a real news article, and having, but away from the websites, and having students actually evaluate and try to discriminate as to whether news was fake or not. And that's really great high-level thinking there.
Yeah, and if we talk about the 4 C's, that's getting kids into that critical thinking aspect. Yeah, I'll see if I can find that. That's a great share of that blog post. That was also part of his one of his books on web literacy for teachers.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Great. So that, as much as in our industry we talk about SAMR and TPACK and 4Cs, I think it's important for us, especially those of us who have our feet more on the technology side, to continue learning about the actual instructional and learning models that are out there, which ultimately, TPACK and SAMR, they're just there to help teachers do more of this. So we can work backwards a little bit as well and learn how those skills are actually being illustrated in the classroom, whether they're on paper or with technology. It's only going to make us better. So with the last few minutes here, I'd just like to open up questions. And, you know, Kellie, let's start off with the question that we had generally for our audience is, what is your next step if you're going along these? After this webinar, sometimes they're just simply people to connect with. Are you going to try to reach out to department heads or principals or curriculum directors or maybe lead teachers to figure out how the continued education of staff can help better bring teachers to facilitating that kind of higher level thinking within their Schoology courses? It's not a small task. The good news is that from now up until the spring, we're going to continue doing LEAPs on this subject. As a matter of fact, next month, we're going to be doing a live course build on LEAP. I'm going to be joined with both people from our K-12 organizations and higher ed organizations, look at some standard curriculum and open source curriculum and put it in Schoology so we can actually see those instructional decisions in action. I think it's going to be a really exciting one. And also coming up is Schoology Next, also a great place to learn. I believe registration is almost open. Is that right, Kellie?
Yeah. I don't know what the exact date is. I just know that I was so excited to see it was going to be in Chicago.
Right. Still seeing some great teachers, great ideas. A couple of questions. One from Bonnie is if there is a LEAP group. If you are not part of it yet, we do have an enterprise leadership group where we announce LEAP and things like that. So you can feel free to join this group. If you are not already in this group, we just have an entrance, a really quick entrance course to help you learn all the system admin features to raise your level of understanding in Schoology, if possibly this is new to you. So if you'd like to be part of this group, if you're not already, email me at leap@schoology.com and I'll get you set up, okay? But this is also a great idea a place to continue these conversations and also ask advice from other people leading their organizations in their Schoology implementation. Mm-hmm. I like the idea that Aaron brings here of asking teachers to prepare curriculum maps and use TPACK as a way to examine how technology might be interjected.
Yeah, I think TPACK's a really great planning tool. And also I think if you're talking about teacher evaluation with administration or even an instructional coach, I think it gives some really good talking points and look-fors if you can have that conversation with somebody else about here's what I was trying to do, here's the instructional strategy that I thought was the best one, you know, here's the subject or the content standards I was trying to address, and then here's the tech tool I used. You know, for teachers that are super strong in content and pedagogy, they may need a little bit of help finding the right technology tool to really support those. Where you might have a teacher who's great with technology tools, but maybe is struggling a little bit with tying in the content strongly. Or for new teachers, that aspect of pedagogy, it's really a nice way. I think it has a lot of potential in our conversations and how we get better and how we help kids actually show what they know. Absolutely.
I have a nice comment from Patty Wolf here that promoting not the 4 C's but the 6 C's, adding connectivity and culture. If you read anything about blended learning,
Yeah.
Almost everyone talks about culture first.
Yeah.
It has to be there. That's a great point, Patty. Thank you. Great. Looks like our comments are slowing down. Well, we're at 11 o'clock here, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. The session was recorded. We'll also record our 4 p.m. session as well, and then post one of them on the Help Center afterwards. If you're not sure where to find our recordings, they are here. You can just go to the Help Center and search for LEAP, and you should be able to find it, or bookmark that link I just shared out in chat. Kellie, thank you so much for joining me in this fun and wild conversation about all these different models.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.